We are going to have the pleasure of hearing from Congressman Greg Walden. He is the ranking member of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee and previously a chairman in the 115th Congress. Walden's taken the lead on privacy and security issues, holding hearings with CEOs of Equifax, Facebook, and Twitter in the last Congress. And he's been working this Congress on establishing a bipartisan federal privacy bill before the end of the year, working alongside his colleagues, Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers, and Democratic counterparts, Chairman Frank Pallone, and Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee Chair Jan Schakowsky. Walden's going to talk to us today about why he wants to see a strong national federal privacy bill. And so we are going to talk to him today with my colleague, Rebecca Kern, technology reporter at Bloomberg Government, and Congressman Greg Walden. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you very much, Congressman, for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Sure.
I just wanted to remind everyone, you know about the app to submit questions throughout, and we'll have some time at the very end before the Congressman has to run to votes. So, busy day, but we're going to be talking about privacy legislation that's in the works, hopefully, on the Hill right now. And I just wanted to start off, how are conversations going, and what are some of your top priorities you want to see in a national privacy bill out of your committee?
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me here, and thanks for the interest all of you have in this really important topic for consumers in our country. First and foremost, we need a national standard. Your privacy shouldn't be regulated by your zip code. And I think that makes a lot of sense. We should have a national standard. We need to have better transparency and accountability. Those who have our data need to live up to the standards they agree to live up to. And that ought to be more transparent and available to consumers. And so we're actually in pretty good discussions. It's been fairly recent, but good discussions with our counterparts on the other side of the aisle about how we might be able to come to terms on a privacy bill. If we don't, then we risk having every state do this. I also want to make sure that these laws, regulations, the federal standard are not too onerous on small companies. I'm an old small market broadcaster, and I worry a lot about the high cost of federal mandates on small entrepreneurs and the effect that has on innovation. If you're big, you can hire whatever you need to comply. And even the big companies have told me that, dealing with what they're doing with the GDPR, is we can comply. If you're Facebook, if you're Google, if you're whomever. Microsoft put 1,600 engineers in the works to comply with GDPR. If you're the new competitive startup to Microsoft and you got 10 guys in a dorm room, you probably aren't going to have what you need to comply.
And we know there's some sticking points already. Preemption and a private right of action have been discussed as things that possibly could hold up conversations. Could you talk about where you stand on those issues, the issue of preemption particularly?
Well, yeah, I think we should look at what's worked and not worked in GDPR, in California law, although it's a little hard with the California law because Javier hasn't written all the rules. We won't really know until June of next year, even though it takes effect at the end of this year, beginning of next year. And so we don't know. But I don't know how you have a national standard if you don't have a preemption, right? Because otherwise states come in and just continue to do what they're doing. And as you say, on your board here, 22 states already have some regulation in this space, but nothing like California. So we got to look at where they got it right, where we think they got it, I won't say wrong, but where we could improve upon it, let's say, recognizing the importance of that law and the size of that delegation to the process. And so I think there's a way to go forward. But I don't want to also have a sort of federal mandated new patent troll trial bar that goes after every little business on a federal privacy standard.
Well, and you were talking about the next thing going into place is California's federal state privacy law. So in January, and then we'll see enforcement mid-year. So where do you have concerns with that law if we don't have a federal law?
Well, again, we're waiting to see how the regulations are going to be written on it. But there are concerns about what it mandates in terms of right to be forgotten or whatever, and how you anonymize data today to make it more secure, you might actually have to keep it attached to the individual so you'd know what somebody has on you so it could be deleted, which may actually work in reverse in terms of data privacy and data security, because getting data to an anonymous standard actually is better than when it's always tagged to you. But if they have to tag it to you in order to comply with a law, it might set up a worse regime in terms of privacy. That's one of the things. And then I think we just have to see how we could get to a national standard that works for all sizes of companies.
Right. Yeah, and you expressed concerns about effects on small businesses.
Right.
How would you envision a federal law addressing that? I mean, would you envision some carve-outs, or how would you protect small businesses?
I mean, it's hard in the data regime to have carve-outs because the weakest link could lead you to a big problem. Yeah, but I think, first of all, companies need to do what they say they're going to do to protect your data, right? Mm-hmm. They shouldn't be able to use your data in ways that are outside of the agreement. Now, we all read those agreements when we update our apps, right? And you can edit it, it turns out. Who knew you could actually say, no, I don't like that part, and I still want to keep this app working. I mean, consumers don't have choice here. The other piece is if you go too far, services that are now, I'll call it free, but we all know it's an exchange, our data for that service, they'll have to monetize in another way. So I think part of what we're looking at is how do you make sure that these incredibly creative people that do start literally in garages and dorm rooms and create worldwide global companies of enormous magnitude and influence on society and commerce, how that can happen to the next generation of innovators, and not so burden them that they go somewhere else.
Right, and we see so much innovation starting in the U.S. So do you have concerns that any federal standard could inhibit innovation in some way?
Absolutely. And if you look at what's happening under GDPR, there's a website, somebody will know it in this room, that tracks the number of publications that are now not available in Europe. I think there are over 1,200 newspapers that now do not circulate. You cannot pull it up when you're in Europe. That may be a U.S. newspaper. And so you can go too far where the compliance costs are too high or the threat of damages are too high, that you back out. Now you've really begun to balkanize the internet.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to avoid. It's an art. It isn't a precise science. You can't tell you if we do X, then the smallest of companies will be able to comply. There will always be a compliance cost. But remember, on the books today, there are requirements for most companies to hold your data securely. The fight we got in with Equifax, was pretty astonishing, really, when we had the then immediate former CEO before the committee. And as near as I could distill it, he said we had one part of the company that knew what software we had and a different part that knew what updates were coming in, and the two basically didn't talk. I can't fix that with a federal law. As I said at the time, no offense, but I can't fix stupid. It just had all of our financial data, and they didn't know what software they had. They were missing what they needed to patch because they didn't know they had the software where they knew they had the patch. Mm-hmm. I can't fix that legislatively.
Well, yes, but when it comes to data security, we have seen even more high-profile breaches: Cambridge Analytica, Equifax,
right.
Capital One. I mean, what can your committee or federal regulators do to ensure consumers' data is secure?
Well, there are a couple of things. You can continue to drive down and hold these companies accountable. And there are certainly damages they end up having to pay. You look at the latest FTC fine on Facebook, $5 billion. Some say, well, that's not much, but it is more than double what GDPR's top fine would be. And so there are tools of enforcement through the Federal Trade Commission that can be enhanced, perhaps. I think it's also important to have clarity and transparency in what the rules of the road are with these companies when they say they have your data. What's that agreement you and I have if you sign up for my app and I have your data?
Right.
And is that fully disclosed, and then do I follow that agreement? And if I don't, then there needs to be an enforcement mechanism. Personally, I don't think it should be the trial bar, because I think you end up then in another patent troll situation. But certainly states' attorneys, others can play an enforcement role here. The FTC properly position.
And there's a lot of criticism of FTC's $5 billion fine. Some call it a slap on the wrist. So some
I get back to my point. It's more than double what the top fine is under GDPR.
Right.
So.
But there are some lawmakers calling for Congress to give FTC more actual civil penalty authority, more resources. I mean, I understand there's maybe 40 people working in privacy. Some people want the staff to grow. Is that something you would back giving?
Well, I mean, there was this proposal that was thrown out. If we gave you X amount of money, what would you do with it? Now, I would tell you, in nearly 30 years of public service, I've never met an agency that couldn't find out what to do with more money if we gave it to them. And they would always tell me I could solve the problem if I just gave them more money. And I'm not sure we don't need certainly to create a new agency.
Okay.
Some at the FTC testified before the committee that they did not want broad rulemaking authority, and frankly, in the past they had that, it got them in trouble, and it got taken away and minimized. So there are models out there that work, very specific sort of authorities to an agency. The other thing I've seen over the years, too, is while everybody's focused on some big player that you think needs to have a huge fine, over time, what you intend for the biggest player to be more than a slap on the wrist gets used against a mid-sized player that practically wipes them out. Because once you give that authority and that limit to an agency, you have given up control over that assessment. And I've seen it over time and I've voted for some of them on polluters and all. You think, well, yeah, go get them because look at the cost of this or whatever. And then the next thing you know, somebody in the bureaucracy goes, well, I can fine you up to $10 billion. And you're not Facebook. You're some mid-level company.
Okay.
And so what do? You roll over and say, hit me with what you got, right? I'll admit anything to survive. So you got to be smart about it.
Yeah. And, I mean, we're seeing state AGs starting to act in lieu of, well, in addition to DOJ and FTC and these investigations on anti-competitive nature of large tech. I mean, do you feel like that's where we're going to see, like with the privacy laws, we're seeing states maybe stepping in on enforcement?
Because we have not set a national law.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, who knew the internet crosses state lines? I mean, what a revelation. Or international boundaries. We should lead in this area, and we should be strong in this area. We're not talking about weak standards here, but we're talking about thoughtful standards. Again, where you have transparency, you have accountability, where you do have an enforcement mechanism, and we'll negotiate what all that looks like. And then there are clear, bright lines. And then businesses can follow them.
Right.
I worry about when we go to 50 different state models, 50 different standards, 50 different whatevers. And then you got Europe doing its thing. And the thing is, we've seen in some of the testimony before our committee, there's evidence of a 40% reduction in innovation in new startup companies in Europe since GDPR came into existence. Now, it may not be all related to GDPR. I'm not saying that. But there are certainly indications that that's playing some role in that reduction because we've had enormous increase in investment here in innovation at the same time. And so I think, capital will move. And we want it to move here. If it's going anywhere, we want innovation here because that's where it started. I mean, these enormous data companies did not launch in, pick your country overseas. They launched here, whether it's Facebook or Google or Amazon. And there's a reason because we are a little, wild, wild west, I'll call it. Being a Westerner, that's not a bad thing. But it's something you kind of have to get the cowboys back in the bunkhouse at night, and that's kind of what we're doing here is saying, okay, guys, you had a lot of fun, you partied a lot. Now let's get back in the bunkhouse because we gotta go back to work tomorrow. And that's why I look at sort of a national privacy standard is, okay, federal government needs to step in, set the rules of the road, have understandable and effective enforcement tools. But I said I don't want to open it up to, in effect, a federal mandated trial bar bonanza where they just send the demand letters like trolls do and you just pay because it's too expensive to fight. We don't need to create that. Well, so that is a bright line for us. So national standard and not the private right action.
Because that's where we're seeing some Democrats wanting some protections for consumers in terms of possibly private right action. So
that's some of their biggest donors, the trial lawyer bar. So.
And we know who controls the House is a member from California. So do you foresee...
I heard about that.
Do you foresee any action this year, at least from your
I hope
committee?
so.
Yeah.
And I'm actually encouraged by the discussions at the staff level in the last few weeks.
Okay.
I mean, there is some paper. There is some serious discussions. And I think the country would be better off with a national standard, and we need to legislate on that.
Right.
But I also have come to the realization if I'm on the other side of the aisle and way over there, I may view that I've got a national standard. It's called California.
Well,
And I get my private right of action. I get my full, total government involvement in this sector. And do I want to lessen that? And if I'm a Californian, do I want to vote to override what my state has done? And keep in mind, most of the California House seats have less people in them than the California State Assembly seats. And they couldn't modify their own law in the last session.
So
So, I mean, that sets up a real political conundrum if you're a Californian.
Right. Do you see the Republicans having some leverage in these conversations, given the California law going into?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Senator Wicker would like to do something in this space.
Right.
I think the Senate would like to work in this. I think the President would like to work with this.
Right.
And I think they don't want to diminish innovation.
Yeah.
And I worry that this will happen here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, another area we've talked about, and there's been a bill proposed, at least in the Senate, is COPPA reauthorization, right. Children Online Privacy Protection, and that's really important and very bipartisan. Is that something you see your committee working on?
Yeah, and I think it's a
year?
model of how you can have regulation in this, I'll call it
Right.
this space.
Yeah.
It's a little different, and have it work. COPPA is held up as an example of a law that actually has been very focused, targeted. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows the metes and bounds, and it works. It may need some modernization, but it works.
Right.
And so I think that could go forward.
Right. Do you foresee some modernization happening this year?
Yeah, probably. The one that I think gets really sticky is data breach.
Yes.
And I put poor Bob Latta through multiple roundtables trying to see if there was a target we could go through on data breach. And my takeaway after, I don't know, we did 3 or 5 or 10 roundtables, the then Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy held a big roundtable in his office, is that there isn't enough pain being felt by either side to want to compromise to where you could fix this federally. Okay. And companies, the big ones at least, are complying with 50-plus state and territorial or city whatever regulations. They're able to do that. Nobody likes it, but nobody wants to give enough to find a compromise. So if you attach data breach to data privacy, I think you bring up 20 years of intra-industry warfare that will sink both.
Okay.
Anybody disagree with that? I mean, I've been in the room with the retailers, the bankers, they're all our friends. They don't get along on this issue. So
do you foresee a data breach notification issue happening with privacy? If you
well,
guys
originally
don't
there was talk that the committee would do both.
Right.
Data privacy and data breach. All in the same bill, and I thought, well, this I'm going to buy a ticket and some popcorn and watch. Because I tried. I mean, we really did have a good faith effort to try and find common ground. It wasn't there. So I think it's better to go figure out data privacy and get an American data privacy bill that works.
Right.
That doesn't shackle innovation, that doesn't overburden startups, that reins in the bigs that misbehave. And I think there's a path to get there. I really do. And we have some really talented, smart staff that are working on it.
Right. Okay.
And Catherine Morris-Rogers is our lead on this.
Right.
She and Jan Schakowsky have spent quite a bit of time together. And it's just a question of whether they want to come to a bipartisan agreement on it. But we've made clear all along what our bright lines are, and they're just 2. So.
Right. And going forward with your committee, we have maybe, 30 or less days left this
About
year?
35 legislative days this year.
So are we going to see any other action on any other privacy or data security related issues you foresee, or hearings, or anything you want to preview here?
Yeah, preview here. Preview is we actually have paper and we're exchanging and talking, so that's the big news item if you haven't tweeted that out already. I mean, that's serious because that had not happened.
Yeah,
until
no, that's
recently.
the development. Yeah.
So this is really the big one.
Yeah.
As you know, that subcommittee has some really other very important work it's been working on, and including these horrible tragedies of kids being left in cars and dying, and I mean, so that's legislation Ms. Schakowsky is very much engaged in, as well as other things like crib safety and consumer product safety.
Protection.
So they've spent a lot of time on those, and they're important issues, and they've got more on that list. And if I'd been chairman, and who knew, I'm just chairman in exile awaiting my return. But if I'd been chairman, we would have moved data privacy earlier in the year, knowing that this California deadline's kicking in.
Right. And
companies are having to staff up and try to figure this out. And because we occasionally get fact-checked in this business, PricewaterhouseCoopers surveyed 200 companies with more than 500 employees and found on GDPR, 68% plan to spend $1 to $10 million. Another 9% plan to spend $10 million if they had over 19,000 U.S. firms of that size. Compliance costs could be $150 billion. So when you're looking at the experience of compliance with GDPR, we can see what it costs, and we don't necessarily need to mimic that.
Right.
I think we can do better, and I think we can achieve the goals of California, but have a system that works, and our teams are trying to negotiate that.
It's a big ask, yeah, and we'll be watching. So I wanted to open it up, I think, to questions, because I know you have just a few minutes left before your votes. If people have any to submit on the app, and I have a few if we need to keep going.
Yes, we got somebody right here.
What would you specifically want to do differently from GDPR for American?
Well, I mean, in part, again, I think they have the provision of the right to be forgotten, some of those things, which, as a consumer, I think that's pretty good. But then when you get into the weeds of how that works, it may be counter to actual the best in terms of data privacy and security. There are other things there that we will look at. Part of it is I don't want to negotiate out everything we're working with the Democrats on right here and now, so I'm being a little vague. But I also think, I was looking at, we're in the radio business. Our old website, I pulled it up the other day to look at something local, and at the bottom they've got some disclaimer. It says we're not meant to circulate in Europe. And again, it's these compliance costs and all that I think we have to dive into, whether it's GDPR or the California law. What's it really mean to those who want to be vibrant and the next competitor, the next Facebook, the next whatever on the web? We don't want to snuff that out, because you look at just these compliance costs. And it really gets back to, if the companies will just do what they say what they tell their consumers they're going to do. And if we recognize nothing is free in this world, we're exchanging our data for that service. But, we had this situation the other day where that app, I think allegedly out of Russia or wherever, would show you what you look like older. I will not tell you this, but it happened during a really boring time in the committee, and several members thought that was pretty cool. Fortunately, at my age, I didn't have to do that, 'cause I already know what I look like when I'm older. But it was. And then you discover it's like by downloading and agreeing to it, if you read all the fine print, I think you turned over your entire photo library and geolocation information for life, probably to the KGB. Hell, I don't know. But how do we do that in a given app so you really, as a consumer, know what the trade is? Now, a lot of kids don't care anymore they don't believe they lost their privacy, a generation ago. Come on, Dad, what are you thinking? You thought you had privacy? No way. But I think most of us still, there are certain things we want, our financial information, our medical information. If we sign up for some cool healthcare app, we don't want to give away all our medical records and blood type and everything else. We need to know what that exchange really is, right? And that they adhere to that. And then if they break that rule, if they break that contract, who enforces it and what's the penalty? So, I know I'm talking about 30,000 foot level here, but I think as a consumer, that's really what we're asking for. It's like this surprise medical billing stuff. We didn't ask to be in the middle of this as Congress. We're not great at this stuff. But if you don't fix it yourself, we're coming. Because our voters, your constituents, our constituents, your customers are demanding it.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions that got submitted through the app as well. So if I could just ask.
Did I check the agree on those? Go ahead.
You read them first? pick your favorites. How do you view the concept of requiring companies that monetize data to share that benefit with consumers?
Oh, now we're getting into their business models. Yeah, they are in effect sharing in the sense that you're getting that service, right? If you're on Instagram or Facebook, you have a free social media platform, except you've given up certain rights to data. But that's the deal. That's the exchange. If not, you can still send those photos via U.S. mail. Yeah, maybe not. Or use your MySpace account. Oh, wait, no, they deleted all that. But I think, those to me are business decisions between consumers and the companies. But the thing we have to watch is if we take away the business model that's allowed for this free exchange, then you will disadvantage certain people, because there will always be some in our country and in the world that can afford it, no matter what it is, and there will be another whole class that can't. And that's not how the internet was ever designed. And so that's been part of its incredible brilliance and ubiquity and success, is it's quote-unquote free. We just need to know what the terms of free are. But if we had Congress in the middle of the monetization question and what percent should go back to it, is that a rebate? Am I issuing? Yeah, no.
Yeah, that gets kind of hairy, huh?
Yeah.
So I'll give you one more, and we'll respect your time here. But why not focus federal efforts at this time on security and let the states experiment on the privacy side? For example, have uniform breach notification standards and mandate reasonable technical and organizational standards commensurate with the sensitivity of the data?
Well, somebody's got to determine what the sensitivity of the data is, right? So now you need a federal definition. Look, I get back to, we don't need 50 states and X number of territories designing separate policies for privacy. Because at the end of the day, whichever state has the most rigorous one will set the national standard. And we've dealt with this on food labeling. We've dealt with this in other sectors. It's why in the area of commerce, we actually have a commerce clause in the Constitution that says maybe a national standard is better. We just haven't acted. And that's why states have filled the void. It's time to act. It's not the only policy, but this is certainly one I think federal standard makes more sense.
Fantastic. I think that is a great ending place. Thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you all for being here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Bingo.